Welcome to the place where buried secrets are unearthed, where myths bleed into history, and history is far darker than you were ever told. This is where we dig up the things no one wants to remember, the rituals they erased, the whispers they silenced, the twisted truths hiding behind holy walls and wedding veils. Tonight, we're going to tell you a story that shouldn't exist, but did. A story of desperate men, cursed villages, and weddings so unnatural they had to be done in silence, in secret with the dead. Because in some parts of the old world, marrying a ghost wasn't madness, it was survival. This is not folklore. This is not horror fiction. This is a real ritual, hidden, practiced, and passed down in whispers through generations, till now. Ghost brides were real, and these men paid everything to have one. Let's start. They called it the Hollow Valley. It's not because it was empty, far from it. The earth there was fat with roots and rot, and the fog rolled in so thick that by dawn you could hardly see your own hands. The trees bent low like they were listening. And in the heart of that valley, cradled by moss-covered stones, in crooked wooden fences, there lived a village where people spoke only when necessary, and never at night. No map bore its name. No road led to it cleanly, but it was there. And for over 200 years, it carried a secret. It's not the kind whispered over wine or scribbled in diaries. This secret had teeth, and once long ago it wore a wedding veil. The villagers of Dromlac, for that was the place's true name, though few dared speak it aloud, lived in silence not because they feared the living, but because they had made a pact with the dead. It began, or so the oldest stories said, in the year of the Great Frost, 1623. The river froze thick enough to walk across. Cattle died with icicles in their eyes. Children vanished into the snowdrifts without so much as a scream. And then came the sickness, fever that bloomed under the skin like bruises from within. The doctors who came up the mountain trail never returned. The church bell cracked after a night of relentless tolling. Father Edric, the only priest for 30 miles, was found slumped over the altar, his hands blistered black. The villagers did what people do when heaven stops answering. They turned to the earth, 2 old things, 2 deeper things. They went into the woods and dug up what their grandmothers had once buried in shame. Little totems of bone and blood, books bound in unknown skin, a language that hissed when spoken. And at the edge of it all was a midwife, not old, but strange, named Marin Glass. She had no husband, no children, but people swore she could make wounds close without stitching, and that animals went quiet in her presence. She spoke only once that winter, just loud enough for the town council to hear. "You've tried prayers," she said. "Now try a promise." The terms were unclear to most, but desperate people don't ask for footnotes. What they understood was this: the village had to give something. Something warm, something fresh, something innocent. In return, the sickness would leave. The land would bear fruit again. Those who followed the pact would never want for love. They say the first ghost bride was chosen on the coldest night of that year. Her name was Siofre, and she had been buried 3 months before, a girl of just 16. With hair the color of harvest wheat, and eyes that still seemed to glow even after death, they exhumed her body beneath the old yew tree, washed her bones in rosewater, dressed her in the wedding gown that had been sewn for her sister, and then, by candlelight, they married her to a man named Donan Tears. Donan had lost 2 brothers to the fever. He was 31, without land or dowry. The village said he would die next. But when he stood beside Siofra's body and recited the ancient vows Marin gave him, words that twisted the tongue and made the candles flicker, something changed. He lived. More than that. Within a year, he had inherited his uncle's home, tripled his harvest, and married a flesh and blood woman who gave him twin sons. But no one ever saw him laugh again. And on the anniversary of his wedding to the dead, he placed fresh lilies at the yew tree without fail. That was the first. It would not be the last. Over the decades, the ritual became refined, formalized. A list was kept. Men who suffered loss, men who fell ill, men who were cursed with misfortune. And when the signs were clear, 3 dead hens at dawn, blood in the well, dreams of a bride with no face, the elders would call the packed gathering. The chosen man was not forced, not exactly. But what choice does a drowning man have when offered a rope? The weddings were never public. Only 5 were allowed to witness: the midwife, the gravedigger, the eldest woman, the second youngest child, and the groom. Each had a role to play. The midwife read the vows. The gravedigger carved the ring from bone. The elder anointed the bride's lips with wine. The child placed a poppy in her hand, and the groom, he kissed her mouth. Always cold, always dry, and yet somehow responsive. They called it in the first truth, that love began not with flesh, but with sacrifice. And for generations, Dromlek thrived. The crops never failed. The winters grew kinder. No plague came again. Outsiders avoided the valley, complaining of migraines or a foul stench in the wind. But every blessing demands a debt, and some debts grow teeth. Because in 1792, a man named Callan Morg refused. His wife had died birthing their first son. He was marked for the ritual. The omens were clear. But he spat on the pact and fled with his child into the woods. They found him 3 days later, nailed to the chapel door. His eyes had been removed, his mouth sewn shut, carved into his chest, as if by fingernail, were the words, "You took vows before the dead remember." That was the last time anyone resisted. Selim Wirt was the kind of man the wind forgot. He walked with the quiet of a stone sinking in deep water. People spoke of him only when it rained, as if even the clouds needed reminding that he still existed. At 29, he had no wife, no child, no field to call his own. Just a room above the cooper's shop, a cracked fiddle he played alone, and a scar across his palm that no one dared ask about. They said his mother had drowned in the well the day after he was born. They said his father walked into the forest with a lantern and never came back. They said Selim, wide-eyed, sharp-tongued Selim, was born under a silence so deep the midwife bled from the ears. No one knew what that meant. But in Dromlek, meaning was often less important than fear. For years, he survived by mending things: shoes, fences, even the dead man's bell at the chapel. He never asked for coin, only bread. Sometimes a song. He was kind to animals, kinder to children. But when he passed by, shutters closed. Then came the year of the crimson fog. It rolled in before harvest, thick, sour, and humming like bees inside the bones. 3 infants were stillborn within a fortnight. The millstones split in half like cracked teeth. A man named Fenric chewed off his own fingers in his sleep, and the signs returned. Crows roosting backward on their perches, milk curdling in the pail, dreams of footsteps behind locked doors. The elders met in silence, voted by candle drip. And on the first moonless night of September, they knocked on Selim's door. He answered before they touched the handle. "I know," he said. The old midwife, a bent woman named Nara, whose face looked carved from old bark, nodded without surprise. "You been called, Selim?" Didn't protest. He only asked, "Who is she?" Nara glanced to the others, then handed him a name written in charcoal on dried birch bark. Adaraloon. Selim stared at it. His lips didn't move, but the silence grew. "Deeper," he whispered. "She was real." Nira's eyes narrowed. "You knew her?" He nodded once. "We played as children." Her laugh always came before her footsteps. "Then you'll know what to say when the time comes," she said. "The dead remember only what love once promised." Selim folded the bark and tucked it into the lining of his coat. He didn't ask where she was buried. He didn't need to. That night, he dreamed of the willow grove, the one behind the old tannery, where no birds ever landed, and where the ground bled sap if you cut too deep. He saw a lantern hanging from the lowest branch, and beneath it, a dare. She wore no veil, only a crown of ash and nettles. Her mouth was stitched shut, but her eyes, God's, her eyes were open. He woke screaming. The day of the wedding came faster than breath. They did not call it a wedding, of course. In the village's eyes, it was the renewal. But Selim knew the truth. Knew the pact was not a prayer. It was a transaction. He was the coin. He dressed in black. Not because it was custom, but because she had once said it made his eyes look honest. The 5 witnesses stood waiting. The midwife, the gravedigger, the eldest crone, a blind woman who hissed through her gums, and a child of 6 holding a poppy crushed in his tiny fist. They stood beneath the yew tree. It had grown larger since Sioffer's time, gnarled and heavy with secrets. At its base lay the coffin, simple and small. Selim approached. His boots sank into the earth like it wanted to keep him. The gravedigger opened the coffin lid. Dare's body lay swaddled in linen stained with rust. Her hair was braided with red thread, and in her chest was a small circular hole, not from violence but ritual. He reached out, hand trembling. "Adair," he whispered. "I'm sorry I forgot the song we used to hum." The midwife began the chant, low, rhythmless, like the turning of stones in a riverbed. The elder anointed Adair's lips with the bitter wine. The child dropped the poppy. It landed on her throat. Then came the vow. Selim's voice was dry as bark. "I take this bond before shadow and stone. I give what warmth I have left. Promise to remember her name, even when mine is gone." The final step. He leaned in and kissed her mouth. It was cold, not the cold of ice, but of something older, a silence that pressed back. And for a moment, just a moment, he swore she moved. Her lips softened, and her eyes flickered. The witnesses said nothing. The coffin was closed, the pact fulfilled. But as the wind rose and scattered the last of the poppy petals into the trees, Selim turned to the gravedigger and asked a question no one had ever asked before. "Do they stay?" "Gone." The old man did not answer. Only the blind woman spoke, and her words scratched like nails across a coffin lid. "What is wed is never wholly buried." That night, Selim did not return to his room above the cooper's shop. Instead, he walked back to the willow grove, lantern in hand, heart beating in a rhythm not his own. And beneath the tree, where the roots tangled like skeletal hands, he saw something waiting. Not Adair, not exactly, but something that remembered her face. The dead do not walk. At least that's what Selim told himself in the days after the ritual. But something did. The morning after the vows, his room smelled of lavender and ash, Adair's favorite scent, though none had bloomed in the valley for years. His fiddle, long untouched, was found lying across his bed. 3 strings had been plucked loose, as if someone had tried to play a tune and forgotten how. And the floor bore footprints, small, bare, and still damp. Selim said nothing, not to the cooper, not to the midwife, not to the blind crone who always seemed to watch with the eyes she no longer had. He simply walked the village like a man under water, every step heavier than the last. The townsfolk noticed. They always did. Women stopped offering him bread. Children whispered behind fences. One boy, no older than 10, threw a stone at his back and hissed, "Ghost lover." Selim did not turn. He was not afraid of the living. It was the night that terrified him. For in the hour just before dawn, when the hearth had burned low and silence blanketed the world like a burial cloth, he would hear it, like the creak of footsteps, slow, uncertain, as though remembering how to move. The first night, he barred the door. The second, he lit every candle and muttered prayers he barely believed. By the third, he waited, not with courage, not with hope, but with the inevitability of one who has already died once in the dark. She came just before the last candle died. Not through the door, not through the window. She was simply there, standing at the foot of his bed in a linen gown still streaked with earth. Her skin was pale as pressed wax. Her hair, unbraided, fell like rivers of old sorrow. Her eyes, they were not Adair's, They were too clear, too still, like glass that had never seen the sun. "A dare," he whispered. She did not answer, but she moved slowly like memory and sat beside him. The bed did not dip. She reached out, and her fingers grazed the scar on his palm. He gasped, not from cold, but heat, fierce, burning, as if her touch lit something hidden beneath the skin. Then she leaned in and placed her lips to his ear. And for the first time since the ritual, she spoke. Only 3 words. "Do you remember me?" Then she was gone. Not vanished, not dissolved, just absent, like a name suddenly forgotten. The next morning, Selim found his door still barred, the candles untouched, and yet sheets smelled of soil and rosemary. The fiddle was tuned, and carved into the wall, just above his head, was a name. Not written, carved a D. Air. That day he sought out Nara, the midwife. He found her beneath the chapel, lighting incense in the crypt, where old bones whispered through cracks in the stone. "You didn't tell me," he said. She didn't look up. We never do. She came to me. Nara closed her eyes. They always do. But she spoke. She remembered. Now Nara turned. Her face was lined like the bark of dead trees, her eyes cloudy with old knowing. "That is not for her. It's for you." "What does it mean?" she sighed. "It means the bond held." I thought it was symbolic. Her voice hardened. "Nothing in Dromlock is symbolic. Boy," he swallowed. "Then what happens now?" Nara looked past him, toward the chapel's high window, where the sun never quite reached. "You live," she said. "And if you're wise, you love no one else." But wisdom was never Selim's gift. That evening he walked back to the willow grove, not to speak, not even to pray, just to listen. The wind through the branches sounded like breathing. The moss trembled beneath his feet. At the base of the tree he found a poppy, fresh, red as blood, and beneath it a lock of dark hair. He bent to touch it and froze. Not because of what he saw, but what he felt. A memory, not his. A kiss under the tannery bridge. Laughter in the wheat fields. A song sung off key by a girl who smelled of rosemary and rain. It was a dare, but it was hers, not his. Her memory inside him, a gift or a warning. That night she returned. This time she sat beside the fire, brushing her hair with a comb that had once belonged to Selim's mother, a comb long thought lost. She did not speak, but when she looked up, her gaze held sorrow, not malice, not hunger, but grief, deep, wounding, eternal. Selim could not bear it. "Why me?" he whispered. She paused. Then, with a hand that shimmered at the edges like heat haze over stone, she touched his chest and said, "Because you listened." Then she stood, walked toward the window, and stepped through the stone as though it were fog. Selim did not sleep after that. Not because he feared her, but because he feared what she might reveal next. For in his dreams he saw other brides, dozens, hundreds, faces half-formed, mouths stitched, eyes weeping salt. And behind them, always behind them, a figure he could not see, but could feel, watching, waiting, smiling. The dreams grew worse. Selim no longer saw just a dare. He saw others. Women without names, walking backward into rivers. Brides in tattered veils climbing out of graves, fingers dripping with candle wax. A child, no older than 5, crowned in bone, whispering a lullaby in a language that tasted like rust, always. Behind them, the smile, not wide, not manic, just patient. A smile that did not belong to any man or woman he had ever known. He woke each morning with ash on his pillow and blood beneath his nails. No wounds, no source, just blood. One evening, as the fog swallowed Dromlack whole, he returned to the chapel not to pray, but to search. Something had nested inside his thoughts, something older than guilt and heavier than memory. He descended into the crypt again, deeper this time, past the ossuary where the nameless dead were stacked like cordwood, into a corridor carved not by hands, but by something with claws. There, at the end of the tunnel, hidden behind a wall of hanging roots, he found it, an altar. Not Christian, not even pagan. A slab of stone covered in carvings that shimmered when his eyes didn't focus. Faces, mouths open in silent scream. A ring of brides holding hands, but all headless. At the center, towering over them, a single shape. No face, no limbs, lay a crown of teeth. Selim staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Someone had been down here recently. Wax was still soft in the cracks. Flowers had been placed at the base of the altar, black poppies bound in twine. Then he heard the voice. Some things should never be married. He turned. The blind crone stood behind him, her mouth curled in a smile far too knowing. You knew, Selim said. She nodded. We all know. We simply forget. On purpose? He stepped toward her. What is it? The thing behind the veil. She chuckled, dry like snapping twigs. It's not a thing, dear boy. A promise, a hunger made into flesh, a vow older than God. I didn't vow to it, no, she agreed. You vowed to her? It's part of it now. They all are. Selim's throat tightened. The brides. She leaned in, breath warm with rot. The first bride was not a girl. She was a door. A silence fell so complete he could hear the stone sweating. Then she said, Do you know why only 5 may witness the ritual? He shook his head. She raised one trembling hand and pointed to her own chest. We are the locks. The pact must be sealed with memory, innocence, blood, time, and silence. Selim's skin turned cold. And what if the locks fail? He asked. She did not smile this time, and the door remembers how to open. That night Adair came again. But this time her form was flickering, as if torn between states. Her hair floated, as if under water. Her voice was layered, not just hers, but others speaking through her. She knelt beside him and touched his heart, and he remembered. Not a dream, not a story, a life. Not this life, but one before. He was not Selim. He was a man named Lauren once, a scribe, a coward, a lover of the first bride, the girl who drank from the chalice of the void willingly. To stop a famine that swallowed 5 kingdoms, he had stood at her side, kissed her brow as she stepped into the stone altar and whispered, Make me a door. He had sealed her in and lived another life to forget it. Tears bled from his eyes, thick, black, and burning. Adair watched him suffer. You broke the circle, she said, and it was all the voices now. You kissed a bride, but kept her name in your mouth. Selim shivered. I didn't mean to. No one ever does. She rose, and suddenly the walls cracked. Not metaphor. Stone split, dust wept from the beams. The chapel bell rang once, though it had been cracked for 40 years, and outside dogs howled without breath. Selim tried to stand, but his legs failed. Adair turned back to him, her veil unraveling. You opened the memory, she whispered. Now she remembers herself. Selim begged, Tell me how to fix it. Adair's face softened for a second. She looked like the girl from the grove, the one who laughed before she stepped. She said, You must bury the name. In a body. He didn't understand. But before he could ask, she vanished. Not into mist, but into him. He fell backward, screaming, not in pain, but in recognition, because now he remembered all of them. Every bride, every vow, every death. And the thing behind the veil? It was no longer waiting. It was walking. There was no more sleep. Not truly. Only flickers of borrowed memory and the itch of a name scratching at the inside of his skull. Selim no longer walked. He drifted. Through the village, rooms that changed shape behind his back. Through hallways where windows once looked out onto green hills, now opening only into mist. No matter where he went, he could hear the voice. Not Adair's, not any one bride's, but hers. The one they called the Hallowed Bride, The one who wore all the others like layers of skin. The one whose veil had never been lifted, because there was nothing beneath it to see. She didn't speak like the living. She echoed, "You gave me a name. You kissed me with memory. You owe me a body." Selim tried to banish her with fire, and with iron, with old scripture inked onto his own skin, but every ritual collapsed like wet cloth. It wasn't until he found the child, the boy who had witnessed his ritual, the one who had placed the poppy in Adara's hand, that he realized what was happening. The boy was no longer a boy. Not really. He sat in the tannery, surrounded by flies, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut, not stitched. Sealed, as if by ash. Carved into his chest, with tiny, perfect precision, were the same 3 words that had haunted Selim since the vow. "You remember me," and in his hand, crushed and clinging to dried blood, was a single black poppy. Selim fell to his knees. This was not a haunting, it was a birth. He staggered from the tannery, through streets that no longer echoed with footsteps, because everyone was hiding, or already gone. The fog had thickened into walls, shapes moved behind them. Brides, countless brides, flickering in and out of time like broken film. He made for the willow grove. There was only one place left, untouched by rot, and only one name left unburied, Adair's. The grave they gave her had never been marked. It was tradition. To speak the bride's name after burial was to feed it, to water it like a seed. But Selim had whispered it too many times. He'd sung it in dreams, written it on walls, carved it into memory. Now it had grown roots, and those roots were waking. At the grove he fell to the ground and began digging, with hands, with broken branches, with his own teeth if he had to. Hours passed. Blood soaked the moss, then the sound, knuckle on wood. He struck the coffin. He froze and wept, not because he found it, but because it wasn't empty. Inside, Adair lay just as she had before, still unmoving, but her face had changed. Gone were the soft lines of death. In their place, something older, hollowed. Cheekbones too high, lips split at the corners. And beneath her veil, eyes black with spirals, like mirrors reflecting fire. And she was smiling. "I know you," Selim whispered. She did not move, but she opened her mouth. And he saw them. Names, dozens, twisting in the dark of her throat like worms. Not just brides. Grooms, children, witnesses. All the souls who had ever taken part in the pact. All fed to the hollow thing behind the veil. Adair, or what remained of her, began to rise. Not by muscle, not by life, but by debt. He screamed, he ran. Not to escape, but to finish it. The blind crone had told him, to end it, you must bury the name. In a body, a name cannot be burned. It cannot be drowned. But it can be consumed. And Selim, full of borrowed memories and blood-inked vows, was already halfway gone. He returned to the crypt. This time alone, no witnesses, no ritual, only purpose. He lay down on the altar, took the knife, carved Adair's name, not into stone, but into his own chest, deep, precise, letter by letter. And with the last of his strength he whispered, "Take it back." The fog howled. The chapel trembled. Outside, every candle in the village went out. And Adair screamed, a sound not of pain, but of being ripped backward, like cloth torn from a bone it had clung to for centuries. Then, silence. For the first time since the wedding, silence. When dawn came, the sun touched the valley for the first time in weeks. The mist retreated. The children came out of hiding, and the grave beneath the willow tree was empty. This was the altar in the crypt. No body, no name, only the smell of rosemary and ash. For a time the village pretended nothing had happened. The fog lifted. The livestock stopped miscarrying. Children laughed again, though only in the daylight. The river flowed clear for the first time in living memory. People began to speak of Selim Wirt as they did the weather, only when necessary and only with caution. His room above the cooper's shop was emptied, scrubbed clean. The chapel doors were resealed. The willow grove was left to grow wild, unvisited and unspoken. But something had shifted, subtly, irrevocably. The pact was gone. The elders never gathered again. The midwife Nara disappeared one morning without a sound, her home left untouched, the fireplace still warm, and the blind crone, the last lock, as she had once said, passed quietly in her sleep. Some say her final words were, "She knows the way back." The ritual was never revived. No more ghost brides were chosen. No more weddings beneath the yew. But silence has its own hunger. And stories once told do not die. They settle in the marrow. They sleep inside the walls. Years passed, and the valley forgot, or tried to, until one day a boy named Lennon found something strange beneath the willow grove. He had been digging for beetles when his spade struck wood. At first, he thought it a root. Then he heard the sound, a thump. Once, then again, soft, insistent. He ran, never returned. That night his sister woke screaming, not from dreams, from the voice that had whispered behind her ear, "You owe me a kiss." The village claimed she was ill, a fever, nothing more. But those who passed the chapel at dusk began to speak of shadows beneath the bell tower, faint music from the crypt, a fiddle out of tune, of black poppies blooming out of season. Then the dreams returned, not for all, just a few. Those who had witnessed, those who had remained silent when the pact still breathed, they dreamt of Selim Wirt, but he was not as he had been. His eyes were blank, his mouth was sewn, but in his hands he held a veil, and he was waiting. In the capital, decades later, scholar of folklore, Dr. Elias Morvan, published a thin, obscure book titled Wives of the Wind, Rural Death Rites of the Forgotten Isles. It contained only one chapter of note. Chapter 7, The Hollowed Bride of Dromlech, was written in curious detail, far too much for a man who had never claimed to visit the valley himself. It spoke of the pact, the 5 witnesses, the veil that must never be lifted, and of one man unnamed, but clearly Selim, who broke the chain and paid the price. The final page held a strange image, not drawn, photographed, a veil pinned to a chapel door, still damp. The caption read, "To marry a memory is to wake what it dreams of." The book never sold well, but one copy found its way back to Dromlech, and whoever read it, or whispered it aloud, must have read the name again, because on the first moonless night of the new decade, the veil returned, hung gently over the old willow tree. Below it, a poppy, crushed, and near it, a single footprint, small bare, still damp. So yes, ghost brides were real. And the men who paid for them didn't just give their hearts. They gave their names, their blood, and, in the end, their memory, because some vows do not die. They only change who's listening. So now you know, the veil was real, the brides were real. And somewhere, deep in the roots of time, the vows still echo. Maybe it was all folklore. Maybe it was all true. But one thing is certain. Some doors once opened, never really close. If this story haunted you, lingered in your thoughts, or made you look twice at shadows, then we invite you to stay with us a little longer. This channel is where we unearth the forgotten, the forbidden, the deeply unsettling corners of history no one dares to speak of. If you want more stories like this, dark, strange, and just believable enough to keep you up at night, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, leave a comment. What would you have done if the bride came back for you? Share this with someone who swears they don't scare easily. Thank you for stepping into the dark with us. We'll be waiting.